Welcome back into Big East Energy Weekly. I'm your host, Mark Snow, with my co-host, Casey Matthews, here talking about NBA draft results and the silly hat snafu that always goes on with the NBA and all of that ridiculousness. Really wanted to talk about this. We had 5 players drafted. You had 2 players from Georgetown. You had a player from Creighton. You had a player from Marquette, player from UConn. Is college coaching underrated in terms of how they get the best out of their players, considering that some teams like a Georgetown with 2 NBA players doesn't even make the tournament? So maybe that's an indictment on Ed Cooley for last year. Maybe there were some other holes that he had. But do you think that just in general, like, what is it about some teams that have, 4 players drafted, like in the top 10, 3 players in the top 10, like Duke, don't win a national title? Talk to me about that. Like, I feel like there's a consensus that I feel like coaching in college is criminally underrated in terms of tactics, in terms of development, in terms of putting players in the right position to win and being better over time than just kind of like, hey, we just have a bunch of talent, we're going to go out and win games.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to chew on there. I think from a coaching perspective and underrated, I think you have to break that down a couple ways, because one is, how do you define underrated? If you're coaching in the Big East, if you're a head coach, or really even now an associate head coach, a lot of assistant coaches in the Big East, you're making a lot of money. So in a sense, I think it's hard to say you're underrated because you're being paid at a high level. Typically, you're not getting paid at a high level in your profession unless you're considered to be elite. So I think what my point is, college coaching, there are a lot of underrated college coaches. I think you find them more, though, in the mid-major, the low major. Mark, there are a ton of high-level Division II coaches.
Sure.
And further down, I think Ben McCollum is a great example. He's a head coach at Iowa now. Ben won multiple national championships with Northwest Missouri as a Division II head coach, and waited for the right opportunity to break into the Division I space, got to Drake, see the run they made last year, and now he's at Iowa. So that he's an example of a guy that for a long time to me would be underrated, but now he's a Power 5 head coach. Your example and your thoughts on the talent. Here's where I go with that, and I know you're a notorious Duke hater. I love it. I think that's great. I don't fall in that Duke hating boat, but my thing is this: there's a difference between the college game and the NBA game in terms of like I guess our next topic, these kind of bleed together, of NBA talent equaling wins, is that especially because it's a tournament style where okay, we'll keep Big East, right? St. John's. Everybody's knock on St. John's was they can't shoot. Can they win, 6 games and win a national championship with a team that can't shoot? Probably not, right? So my point is this: the tournament is a different animal altogether. Whereas the NBA, when you get to the playoffs, it's best of 5, best of 7. And so I think the best team and the most talent typically will win out in that situation, versus a situation where in the tournament it's win or go home in one night. You see a Virginia team a few years ago gets knocked off by a 16 seed. There's nobody in the country who would ever argue that they were less talented. It was just that night they didn't have their best stuff. And who was it? Was it
UMBC?
UMBC.
Yeah.
UMBC did. And that's how it works. So, I mean, I think I don't know if I'm even answering your question. I just think sometimes we get hung up on, they have so many draft picks, so many NBA players on their team. How do they not win a national championship? Well, I mean, you got to be able to play together. And that's the one thing about talent, is typically with talent comes egos. And you've got to manage that. That, to me, is why I don't think people like Calipari and Pitino are overrated. Because when you're recruiting that level of player every year, you're managing insane egos. And not only are you managing their egos, Mark, here's another factor that you don't think about as, I think, just a fan. There are so many other people. There are parents, there
Oh
are
God, yeah.
agents, there are AAU coaches. You're having to manage their egos too. And it's a lot. Now, but that's why they're getting paid so much stinking money, is because they are dealing with all of this. Okay.
Yeah.
But I
And
don't think it's as easy as saying, well, you had NBA talent, should have won a national championship, or you should have won this. There's just so much more that goes into it.
I don't disagree with most of that, but what I will disagree on, and this is something that if even I would say this to Calipari's face, is you can't use, we have, because he said this the other day. I don't know if he was, I forget what publication it was, that his players have made over $1 billion in the pros. Okay. He also, with criticism of not winning national championships at Kentucky with the amount of players that he got and the number of recruiting classes that he had there, having only won one, he started to move. When you start to move the goalposts about like, but is that really what we're here for? Like, that to me is a sign of you haven't met expectations. As good of a coach as you are, as good at managing personalities, to your point, as he is, he really isn't as good as we talk about, because they really only won. Were they successful in the grand scheme of things? Yes, but were they successful based off of what they essentially put out there, which is constantly having the number one recruiting class in the country, constantly talking about Final Four, which they didn't make a ton of in his tenure, didn't win more than one national championship. I think winning conference tournaments is great for the coaches. It's great for getting paid. It's great for your resume. But as far as fans and as far as the grand scheme of things, not as big a deal anymore, in my opinion. It just isn't.
The conference tournament, you're saying?
Yeah, or just winning your conference, like putting
But do you
yourself
think
in
that
the best.
maybe you could reduce that down to certain fan bases? Because I think once like
I'm talking about at the highest. I'm talking about the highest level, which the Big East is, and whether we're talking about and even listen, Dan Hurley can sit there and talk about how they have goals and they're gonna win the Big East this year, dethrone St. John's, all that stuff. That's great, but let me tell you this, and it comes down to the bottom line. Would you rather win a Big East championship, or would you rather be in a Final Four and have a chance to win a national championship? I think that's a no-brainer conversation. Like, you'd rather have a Big East championship than be in a Final Four?
I think it's worth debating.
But is it? Like, what's the point? What's the point of college basketball at the end? Is to be the last team standing. And it sucks for everybody else.
If you're saying, would you rather win a national championship or would you rather win a Big East championship? Obviously, that isn't up for debate. You'd rather win a national championship.
But I think the holy grail for coaches and programs is to get to at least get to the Final Four.
Yeah. Again, I'm not saying don't take that. I'm not saying the answer is no. But what I am saying is I think it has to be okay. Great example. And I hate to always bring up my past, but it is my past. We lost to San Diego State, the last game I ever was a part of in college basketball. San Diego State in the Elite Eight. Okay. And we make that basket, we go to the Final Four, or I'm sorry, not make the shot. If we don't foul, we probably win and we go to a Final Four. A few weeks earlier, we were in Madison Square Garden playing against this guy, you might remember his name, Colin Gillespie.
Oh, yeah.
And we guarded a ball screen wrong 2 straight possessions, and he banged a 3, and they beat us in the Big East championship. That loss in the Big East championship was harder for me to swallow than the loss to San Diego State. That's why I say it's something to at least to debate. And I also think it's dependent on who you are, because winning, I was also a part of the only Creighton team to win a Big East regular season championship, and we shared it with Villanova and Seton Hall. Mm-hmm. But I think if you were to ask Creighton fans for their top 10 moments as a fan, I think that victory against Seton Hall is up there with the best moments in history, and it might be the best. Over beating Princeton to go to the Elite Eight, over beating Ohio to go to that first ever Sweet 16. Like, I don't know. I mean, I think everybody's gonna have a different opinion, but winning a championship it's so hard to do that I just do believe that it's right there, man. It really is for me. It is right there, winning a Big East tournament championship in Madison Square Garden. It's right there with going to a Final Four. I've never done the Final Four, so it's hard for me, right? I can't sit here and say that 100%. I would obviously cut off my arm to have gone to a Final Four. But I don't know, man. It's a really special deal to win.
I get it.
To win your conference tournament.
I go back to this, and this is zero to do with you or Creighton or other teams that haven't experienced Final Four or that type of success. This has more to do with the mindset of elite coaches. Like, if we're going to talk about Calipari, we're going to talk about Scheyer, all these guys that are getting paid like Buco bucks to win titles, not to share titles with others in the SEC and the Big East and other things like the ACC. It's what's John Scheyer's job right now? Like, if I was to say, like, what's the expectation for Duke?
Yeah, absolutely. National championship. No question.
What's the expectation for Kentucky?
Right now?
National title.
But still, yeah. No, I know what you're saying. I love this discussion. What I'm saying is I think it depends on where you are. Because if you're UConn, you've won 2 of the last 3 national championships. So you can't win a Big East championship and lose in the round of 32 and go, okay, it was still a great season.
Right.
Because the expectation is a national championship. Whereas if you haven't achieved that,
of course,
I still think you put them up on the same, again, not national championship versus Big East. I'm not saying that. If you win a national championship, that's 14 rungs above any conference tournament championship. No question there. I was just specifically saying making a Final Four because, yes, it's a hell of an achievement and it's on the resumes. All those things are true. Cutting down the nets in your conference tournament, and maybe we should even say it's got to be a premier conference, right?
Yeah, of course. Like, I feel like a Big East championship is as valuable as, maybe it's equal to a Final Four, but I feel like if you haven't done it, you have to put the Final Four ahead of that, number one. And then the second thing I would say is, I think we're too soft on the expectations of these coaches because of what college athletics used to be, which is developmental, which is separation of college and pro. College athletics is essentially an arm of pro sports now. So the idea that a guy like Calipari or a guy like Pitino or even a guy like Scheyer wouldn't have those expectations and meet those expectations, like, that's what their fan base is looking for. Now, when you lose, like, as much as of a Duke hater as I am, if I'm a Duke fan, I'm spinning the Duke loss to Houston. Well, you got to look at it because that's what everyone does. So if you don't like that, I hate on John Scheyer for not having at least made a final game with the number 1 pick in the draft, the number 4 pick in the draft, the number 10 pick in the draft. You have 3 of the top 10 players, and you had Tyrese Proctor get picked, and you had Sion James. Your entire team, all 5 players were drafted last night. And you don't at least make the final against the Florida team that had Walter Clayton drafted.
Your expectations are through the roof, bro. I feel,
bro, you'd had your whole fucking team drafted. 5. Not.
I always
say
this though, Mark. The other team's trying to win too.
That's true. That's true. However,
Houston's a phenomenal team.
But you were also up, and you had a
that to me is the biggest
choke.
indictment. That's the bigger indictment, is that you lost that.
So my point is like, the college coaching being underrated is when you get to this elite level, if you're not an elite level coach, but you have elite talent, you don't get over the hump because you don't have the ability, at least not yet. John Scheyer's young. He's got a long career ahead of him. At least not yet. He's not at that point where he can go, all right, Cooper, here's what we're doing, versus just kind of throwing that out there and just letting the talent take over, because it wasn't enough against Houston, a much grittier team, a team that has a coach that has never won a national title, has been to the Final Four a few times, and they just stuck around and kind of, like you said, yeah, the other team was trying to win too, but there wasn't as much talent on the Houston team. They just wanted it more. And so they ended up winning that game. And I think that's an indictment on the coaching and not having the ability to kind of take the talent that you have and deliver. That's my only comment.
Yeah, I can't get on board with that one all the way. I think the hard part there too, you gotta it's I know I'm making excuses, but
You kind of are.
the other but I mean it's like those moments are so big. And you're at the end of the day, especially at a Duke and a Kentucky, most of the time you're still coaching. I mean, Cooper was 17 years old. You're still coaching 17 and 18-year-old kids that it doesn't matter what play you draw up, what defensive coverage you put in, and none of that matters if those players wilt under the pressure. And I'm not necessarily saying they did, but I am saying that pressure impacts people. And also look, the flip side of this, and I know we weren't here to discuss Houston versus Duke, but in a game like that, where it looks like it's over, what also happens is the other team is relieved of all pressure on them, and they start playing with a freedom and a almost confidence that they weren't playing with before, because it's like, well, we have nothing to lose. We're going to lose anyways. And that's when I think there's a special talent that some coaches have to say, hey guys, like we're down 10 with what is it, a minute and a half to go. But guess what? It's still not over. We know that Cooper Flagg is on that other team. We know that Con Knippel's on that other team, all those things, but the game's not over. And again, that takes a special talent. But you know what it also takes, Omar? It takes guys with experience. And that's something that Coach Sampson has that John doesn't have right now. And so I love these discussions because I do think on the surface it can look a certain way, and when you really get into it, it might look different. I also think you hate Duke, and so it's
no, I but if you take the Duke, if it just put Seton Hall in the mix, just throw Seton Hall in the mix, like Kevin Willard, like not he's with Villanova, but like let's just throw Seton Hall and Shaw in the mix. If they're in the Final Four and they have all of this talent, they got three top 10 picks. I am all over Shaw, and I'm not I'm literally wearing a Seton Hall shirt. I don't hate Seton Hall,
right?
I would be all over whomever it was. Ed Cooley could be freaking could be Mac. Like it doesn't matter. Like it could be any coach. If you're in that situation and you've been essentially bestowed a program that is, from all intents and purposes, a big brand in college basketball, if not the brand, and you're bringing in talent constantly over and over again, the coffers are constantly filled. Yeah. And you can't finally was able to get to the Final Four after a few years of just basically the number one recruiting class every year, right? Rinse, cycle, repeat. And the expectations aren't gonna stop. Like, you got the Boozer twins coming next year. You got Dame Sarr, who is probably the number one, probably would have been a first round pick this year, who's now with Duke there. So like, I just feel like with coaches, we have to hold coaches to that standard if you're going to be at that level. That's all I'm saying is like that. And to your point, Ben McCollum, great coach now at Iowa. By the way, did you see him hoop the other day? Like with Cooper DeJean, and like Cooper DeJean went back to Iowa for practice. Ben McCollum can still ball. All right.
Really?
Oh my God, dude. Like he was crossing people up, like, with his receding hairline, making people look silly with his terrible haircut. Like, I just think it was fantastic. Like, so like you're right. There are guys at mid-major levels. I got another one for you that's still in the SoCon. Dan Earl is another phenomenal coach. He's 50 years old, was at Penn State or played at Penn State. was an assistant at Penn State, was an assistant at Navy, was a head coach at VMI, where a lot of coaches' careers go to die, and parlayed that into a step up at Chattanooga in the SoCon. I think he'll be the next sub power 5 coach to kind of get a P5 level job. Similar to like a Nico Medvedev that was at Furman, that's now at Colorado State, or maybe he's in New Mexico. I don't know.
Minnesota.
Those guys jump around. Minnesota now. But like, so my point is like, yeah, are there better coaches at lower levels because they're not getting the opportunity at P5s? Yes. But the Power 5, the elite coaches who we talk about constantly, ACC, Big East, and others, if you got this much talent, man, you can't hide behind, hey, they're kids. The other team was playing too. It's like, yeah, I get that. But you know what?
But only one team can win. I mean, only one team can win a national championship.
But people are literally calling Cooper Flagg the next Kevin Garnett. Or did you hear what Kendrick Perkins called him? If Kevin Garnett and LeBron James had a baby, that's who Cooper Flagg would be. So you're trying to tell, like, from a skill set perspective, that's who that is.
I don't like that. I don't even like to think about that. But
I'm just saying, like, that's the type of talent we're talking about, and couldn't
but okay,
seal the deal.
All right, and I know we're going on here. We're gonna have to cut this one into 2 episodes for sure. But okay, if that's the case, then, and that's the bar, is you have to win a national championship, then we're also saying that Dan Hurley was a failure last year.
100% was.
Okay. I mean, as long as you're willing to say that every coach that didn't win a national championship failed, then.
But isn't that what they? But okay, but isn't that what the majority of them would say? And then in perspective,
yeah, that's what they say, but it's not what they mean. It's not. It's not.
You don't. I think some do mean it. Like, that's the point. I think the ones that do mean it are the ones that eventually end up being on top of the mountaintop, and the ones that don't never do it. And that's okay.
Yeah,
like,
I understand the argument. Yeah,
there are some people. Like, I'll give you a good example. There are some people who wake up every day at 7:00 in the morning. They do a workout. They go to their regular routine. They raise kids, whatever, and they make a modest living, and they're fine with it, and everything is cool in their life because they are content with who they are, and they know who they are and everything. There are college coaches who have that exact same mentality, who are content with where they are, and maybe they're trying to excel and get better, but they're never going to be. You mentioned Dan Hurley, the Dan Hurley mindset of, I live and breathe this, and I'm literally going to, like, I would literally die on the court to win a basketball game. Maybe that's not healthy, but that's the reality of who that guy is. And that's what I believe most coaches are aspiring to be, is to end up having the mentality where they're constantly involved in being the last team standing. And if that's not who you are, then I don't necessarily know if you should be in the profession. Like, I mean, personally.
No. I agree with that. If you're not waking up with a drive to win the whole thing, then what are you doing? But I also think you got to be realistic about who your team is. Like, I can.
No one's going to win it every year. No, I understand that. Like, but at the same time, if you have expectations to win and you don't win, that's a failure. I mean, let's just call it a spade a spade.
Yeah. No, I do understand. I do understand what you're saying there. I think, yeah, maybe I'm just too nice, and the word failure is tough for me. I just think it's also about, like, I don't know. I mean, I guess I just feel like you can have an expectation to maximize, like, that to me would probably be where I would land. Did you get the most out of your team? Did you compete at the highest level that you could possibly compete at? And if you did, I think you could say, this was a great season. We achieved and we accomplished. Maybe not our ultimate goal, but we have enough here to be proud of.
That's a different story. That's a different argument. Because I think that's true.
Okay.
Like, let's go Big East wise, right? Okay. St. John's, did they let's just go down by based off of where people finished. St. John's won the league last year. They obviously lost in the second round of the tournament. Was the year a failure or was it a success in your opinion?
I mean, I think it was a success. I think they won the Big East tournament. Really?
Yeah, because it was one of the best years they've had it was the first time they've done anything in 20 plus years. They're a number 2 seed in the tournament. You lose to a 10 seed in the second round after the promise of, like leaning into all of this NIL and really kind of having the type of players that Pitino wants. And they don't even get to the second weekend. That's a failure to me. Like I think on the flip side of that, if you're a coaching staff, you 1,000% can go into your fan base and say, hey, based off of what we've done over the last 25 years, this was a success. But if we're talking about it in a vacuum, did you achieve at least getting to the Sweet 16, at least getting to a second weekend, maybe making a regional final?
Maybe that's the whole argument, right? Because I think two things can be true at the same time.
Sure.
And if you can separate those two things, and I think you understand the logic of what I'm saying. If you can't, and you are looking at this strictly in a vacuum, then I do understand what you're saying. I just feel like, again, that basically, and I've heard all the things, right? There's one team that wins national championship, and 300 and whatever it is, 60 teams that don't, right? I get all that. I just think a lot of that stuff is really dramatic, and really at the end of the day, you just got to be realistic about your expectations and realistic about like what are you trying to achieve. Now I think Pitino's a different animal altogether. So like I'm sure he's losing sleep still over not winning a national championship.
Sure.
Which is, again, kind of maybe counterintuitive to my argument because I do think he's one of, if not the best to ever do it. But
a great example is like, okay, so we'll go back to the Big East. DePaul, season of success or a failure?
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say that was a successful season.
Me too. Me too. I think it's a success for DePaul because of where they have been historically and the direction of the program and where it's going. No one's expecting DePaul to make the NCAA tournament. No one's expecting DePaul to make the NIT. No one's expecting DePaul to make the crown. The fact that they were even
the crown they are because
you know what I mean. Like, but the idea is like no one's expecting them to do much, and the fact that they were competitive is clearly the trajectories going forward. Seton Hall, failure. Total abject failure. Like, sorry, Butler, failure. Like, you have Thad Matta. He made a Final Four. He's a decent coach. He's been in this game for a long period of time. The product's got to be better for Butler, in my opinion. Sorry, that's just my opinion. Xavier, I think it was more of a success than a failure, but you're also now back to square one because you lost your coach. So you could go UConn, failure, because you had Dan Hurley going off throughout the entire offseason, and I was one of his biggest cheerleaders talking about how this team was gonna be in the mix for a three-peat, and they weren't close to it. Eventually, in the end of the year, they got to where they needed to be, like where they actually were competitive against this Florida team that ended up winning a national title. Probably showed that they were more Final Four ready than most if they actually were healthy, but who cares? Those are all like in the ether, like, oh, if this happened, ifs and buts and candies and nuts, what a wonderful Christmas it would be. Who cares? It was all ifs and buts. They lost, so it's a failure. They didn't get to a second weekend. That's not UConn level success, especially if your head coach, who just won back-to-back, is literally spouting off throughout the offseason saying, hey, we're the number one team in the country.
Yeah.
Right?
I get it. I see what you're saying. I don't even think I'd have. Well, can't look back, but my expectations for them were much lower. You and I talked about that before. I didn't think they'd be the best team in the league. So
but that's here nor there. Like, that has your predictions, my predictions have nothing to do with what the expectations of each team should be. And if you're St. John's now, especially that you have Pitino, that you have the NIL money, that you have the kind of the pipeline to continue to pump out these good teams year in, year out. I'm sorry, boys. The expectations every year is going to be you better be knocking on the door of the Final Four every year, or this whole experiment is going to be a disaster.
Yeah, I think that's part of. I mean, it's why they make the money for one, but it's also the tough part, right? Because you make a Sweet 16, you're one of the top 16 teams in the country. You should be able to look back at that and go, "Man, that was a hell of a year." But
I'm
if
going
you
to say
don't,
this to you, Casey, because you've been in this profession and I'm friends with a lot of coaches. I think if you talk to coaches 1, 2, 3 years down the road, that's when that becomes the ability to kind of reflect and say, hey, you know what? That was a freaking great year. And man, we probably should have, at least got to a Final Four, but shit. That year in 2024, we made the Sweet 16 or whatever it is, 4 years from now, you think about that. And that's when it should matter. Not the next year when you're pissed off that you lost because, XYZ happened or you got a bad call or whatever. So I don't know. I think as time goes on, you can reflect on each individual season, but in a vacuum, when we're talking about programs and what their expectations are, that's why I think, again, college coaching is so criminally underrated, because even if we just talk about the guys who are at the top of our league, the Hurleys, the Macs, the Patinos, without them, these teams, if you just throw, like you just said, 3 top 10 talent players on a squad, they're going to win some games, sure, but they're probably going to lose eventually because they're not under the stewardship of elite coaches.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah. No, I get all that stuff. This stuff is fun. I love these debates. Hey, I'd love for anybody that's still listening, 55 minutes in, you're obviously invested in the conversation. Share your thoughts with us in the comments, because
I would love to know who Big East fans think had a if you were to rank the teams last year, was their year a success or a failure based off of what their programs have done in the past and what the expectations were for them going this year or that year, and then going into this year, expectation wise, where are we now? I think the St. John's expectations are ramped up. I think UConn's expectations are ramped up. Creighton's are ramped up. I think with the House settlement, as long as there's not too many lawsuits that kind of jerry rig what ends up happening and how this gets distributed over the next year or so, I think the Big East in general, the expectations for the league are going to skyrocket because the money's going to be there. So now it's up to these coaches. Hey, deliver on the ROI. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. We'll see.
Just so you know, we just got word Casey was traded to Adidas. So that Nike hat he's wearing doesn't really matter. He's actually an Adidas guy now. He's been contracted with them. We don't have a hat for him currently, but
I wish that was true, Mark. I really do.
We're just gonna sit there and watch him with the Nike hat, knowing that he's an Adidas guy. Just so you guys know,
Adidas. If you want to sponsor me, this hat can come off and put another one on. Let's do it. Let's get it done.
Hell, Puma starter, Carl Banks, give me a call. Starter, we'll hook it up.
There you go.
All right, this has been another episode of Big East Energy Weekly. For Casey Matthews, I'm Mark Zanetto, saying, hey, this went off the rails, but I had a great time.
It was awesome.